All right, welcome to Dugout Dish Podcast, where we cover everything baseball recruiting. I'm Andy Kirikides. Welcome my co-host Keith Glasser. Keith, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Looking forward to covering a couple topics today. What we're going to open up with is a topic that's pretty popular. It's a question that we get asked quite a bit, and is running people through the evaluation process from a college coach's eyes, right? And what we're going to do here today is try to break it down into two basic parts. So we're going to have the talent evaluation and we're going to have the character evaluation. We're going to get into some nuance around those two particular pieces. So Keith, I'm going to pass it off over to you if you want to get us started about what a coach is looking for from a talent perspective.
Glad to be here. The first thing that I think college coaches are going to ask themselves, the bottom line is, can you help that college coach win at his program? The biggest thing that people need to understand, I think, from a college coach's standpoint is that, they're paid to win baseball games. So when they go out and recruit and they're looking for players to bring into their program, they're looking for guys that are going to help them win as many games as they possibly can. Now that, takes into account a lot of things. It takes into account your metrics, your ability to play baseball, your academics, your character. There's a lot of things that go into that. But the bottom line is, how are you going to help me win baseball games? So when we go out and look, that's the first question that is going to go through my mind. Okay, I'm going to go watch this game. This is the kid I'm going to watch, or these are this team I'm going to watch with these kids. Which one of these kids is going to be able to help me win? And then we kind of break it down from there. Everybody's going to evaluate a little bit differently. And I think that you can probably cover a little bit of that stuff, from what certain programs look for, whether it's Division I, Division II, Division III. There's going to be certain metrics that everyone's going to have to hit, things of that nature. But for the most part, the basic question is, can you help me win? And then we're going to go from there.
Yeah, it really is kind of a binary thing off the beginning. That's what you're trying to come to the conclusion of, right? It's a yes or a no. It's a yes, I think you're good enough, or no, maybe you're not quite good enough right now. Maybe you're, somebody that's just not going to be good enough for my program. And everybody's going to have different criteria, right? Like even within conferences at the highest level, there, Virginia and Wake Forest might be looking for slightly different things that they value, because based on their history of evaluating players, based on guys who've done really well in their program, maybe how they fit at their particular field, they're going to evaluate guys and they're going to come to different conclusions. And that's a tricky part, because it's an art, not a science. And every program at the end of the day is going to value different traits. They're going to value different types of players. They're going to construct their roster differently. And it's really not a straightforward answer around, are you good enough to play at this level? Because it really comes down to a specific program. And I'm sure you've run across it plenty of times where you've seen a kid that you thought was awesome, that other guy didn't think was that great, and he ended up having a great career for you. Or maybe you go and you see somebody who you weren't that high on, and he ends up going to, maybe a level up. Maybe, while you were at RPI Division III, maybe that kid ends up getting a Division I scholarship, and it was somebody that you just didn't feel was going to be really good at RPI. And what people often question is, well, like, how is that kid good enough to go there? And it's a really tough question to answer unless you have the insight into what that coach really values and what they think is going to help them win games. But I mean, at the end of the day, are you good enough to help me win games? And that's what coaches are trying to figure out. And they're going to use all the information that they have disposable to make that decision. They're going to be checking in on athleticism. They're going to be checking in on your production. They're going to check in on your, projectability. It's all going to depend on your age and what you look like in a uniform. And, it's nuanced. And that's the tough part about the evaluation process, is that if it was a science and it was all based on metrics, then it would be easy for everybody, but it's not. So,
no, and I think a big portion of it too is, the athleticism is obviously one of the bigger things that people are going to be looking for in whether or not you can help them win, right? Like, there's going to be a decision made relatively quickly when I show up to a game, which guys are the most athletic on the field that I think might fit into our program. And then from there, you can start breaking it down. Like, okay, like, I'm going to look in the middle of the field. I'm looking at catchers. I'm looking at shortstop, second baseman, center fielders, and then kind of making a decision. Can I move these guys off that position and still help me win? Or is this going to be my shortstop? Or can I take this shortstop, put him in left field? Can I put him in right field? What can I do in order to be able to continue to win more baseball games? And generally speaking, right, like you're going to want to go after some of the most athletic kids that you're going to be able to find, and then start moving things from that standpoint. And it's going to be across all levels, right? Like when I was at RPI, if I'm recruiting infielders, I'm generally trying to stick in the middle of the field and then see what that guy does. Can he stick in the middle, or does he do something that, he doesn't do something as well as your shortstop is going to, so I can move him to third? Or, this guy doesn't, he doesn't have that quick first step. I can slide him over to first. He's a shortstop who, he doesn't really have great hands. I can put him in the outfield. He can catch a fly ball. So in those types of things, and that gets into the character piece and the type of kid you are and the work ethic and things of that nature, because then it becomes, is this kid going to be a good teammate? And will he help me win by being willing to be coached and go play a different position? Right, like there's way more that goes into it. You could be the best shortstop in your league, or your high school league, your town league, or whatever it is that you do, but you might not be the best shortstop on your college team when you get there. So then you might slide to second, you might slide to third, you might end up in the outfield. The whole idea is that you're going to be playing on the field and getting ABs and helping that team win. It's not to be the fifth shortstop on the roster, hoping that you're going to get an opportunity at some point in time. Like, hey, you can go play right now and play in center, or you could just hang out and be the fifth shortstop and never play. So those things I go into it as well. The athleticism I think is paramount in the recruiting process, and then you can kind of like coaches will go from there. Like, can I move him off? Does he stick? Is that kid going to be willing to do that type of stuff? And those go into, can you help me win? But then it also blends into the character piece as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think the athleticism part that you hit on is really important, because at the end of the day, when you get to the next level, it doesn't matter what level you're at, Division 1, 2, 3, junior college, NAIA, size, strength, speed matter, right? They do. And it's a reason why guys take chances on really good athletes. They may have some things they need to clean up from a pure baseball perspective, but if you can really run and you've got a good frame and you're a good athlete and you can do different stuff, you become a piece of the puzzle that can be movable, right? To your point, most high school shortstops, most of them aren't going to play shortstop at the next level, but the reason they get recruited is because they're athletes. They're usually the better athletes on the field. Same thing with center fielders. Not all center fielders in high school can play center field at the college level. But if you're a center fielder in high school and you do some of the other stuff that translates to the next level, you put yourself in a position to be recruitable. And I think that kind of takes us into the metrics thing, right? And it's why metrics matter. But I know we both have our stances on this in terms of the metrics matter. They do. They absolutely do. Your size, your strength, your ability to run, your arm speed, how hard can you hit the baseball? They're all pieces of the puzzle. But I think the big takeaway, there's an obsession with these metrics because of different websites that post your rankings, and all this data is collected at workouts, and it is a piece of the puzzle, but it's more complicated than that. And I'll pass that on you to get us started on that conversation.
Well, I think they are important, right? Like they're going to be the thing that is going to get you your foot in the door at certain programs. Like every program has a floor from a metric standpoint. There's going to be a certain number that everybody is looking for within their specific program that is going to be what the guys that they're going to recruit. And everyone values different things differently. So it's a moving scale with every program. There's no right or wrong answer. This isn't a science as much as we're trying to make it out to be, but recruiting isn't. But from a metric standpoint, your baseline numbers are going to be essentially what coaches are going to kind of look at from the standpoint of like, okay, does this guy fit into my program? The second piece of that is if your baseline numbers do fit into that program, now those baseline numbers have to show up in game or be better, right? Like how many times have you and I seen somebody that, hey, this kid runs a 6.6 60, and then you watch him play in game and he plays a lot slower. Or the time you've seen a guy run a 7 flat 60 and plays in the middle of the field and you're like, I don't know if he's going to be able to make it. And you watch him play and that first step is explosive and he gets off the ball. And it's like, okay, like I think he might be able to do it. And the same thing from a hitting standpoint. I've seen a lot of guys who can really generate some bat speed and get that whip and that swing. And, they're triple digits off a tee. You put them in the box and the baseball's moving and they can't handle spin. They can't handle velo. They swing in the same path. So there's no adjustability in that swing, and they're like, that number needs to show up in game. Because there's a lot of guys who are going to be triple-digit guys in college on exit velo on balls that are moving. So you need to be able to translate all that stuff into the game in order to continue to be recruited. Like I said, it's going to open the door, but it's got to show up in game. Like that's when the lights are on and you're out there playing. That's when it has to show up. It's great to flash those numbers, but I need to see that coming from you in game so that I know you're going to be able to help me win baseball games at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Baseball doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And that's the hardest thing about it is there's so many factors that come into play to be successful, right? Being able to command the ball, right? You need to throw hard, like stuff matters. It's that simple. It's really hard to be good at the upper level of college baseball throwing 88. You got to do some other stuff really, really well, right? And velocity matters. Like the reason it matters is you can make mistakes in the strike zone. It's going to speed guys up, which makes secondary stuff a lot better. Most guys who throw harder, their secondary stuff has more action to it because they're able to generate more spin. They're able to generate more arm speed. So like velocity absolutely matters. But there's also guys who throw 91, 92, 93 and get shelled because they can't do any of the other stuff that really matters, right? So to your point, if you got a good arm, that metric's going to tell me that you have a good arm. Now I need to figure out, are you a good pitcher? Or do you have the ability to be a good pitcher, right? Do you show me some other stuff that's really interesting? Like, maybe you don't throw super hard right now, but you do all the soft stuff really well. You can command the ball. You've got really good mound presence. You show the ability to spin the ball, seem to be super competitive. Maybe you're a tall, skinny kid who's got a good frame, and I'm willing to bet on that because I feel confident as a coach that I can develop the velocity piece of it, right? So there's the other side of it that those metrics get you in the door, but to your point, they got to show up, right? And the one thing I'll add about the velocity thing is that everybody gets obsessed with posting their highest velocity. And it's usually in a bullpen, and it's usually when you only have to throw 15 pitches. And let me tell you, college coaches know. When you show that I topped out at 89 today, you threw 15 pitches. What a lot of guys don't realize is that I'm more concerned with where do you pitch at, right? Great, you hit 89, that's awesome. But if I go watch you pitch and you top out at 89 in the first, but then the second, third, fourth, and fifth innings, you're 85, 86, you don't throw 89, you throw 85, 86. So, I think it's important for kids. I think it's important for players to understand that as college coaches come up to watch you play, the metrics may get them there. Your ability to actually operate, your ability to compete on the mound, your ability to compete in the batter's box, your ability to defend, not just be able to run, but actually be able to defend. Are you in the right spots? That's what coaches are really going to bear down on. And that's when they're going to ultimately make their decisions. You might get identified because you throw hard, but you get recruited because you do the other stuff.
Yeah. The two things just off the top of my head as you talk that I was thinking about, I can't tell you how many times watching pitchers that I've seen that dude's flashing 89 in the first, and then you're 4 to 6 the rest of the game. And the flip side to that is when we're standing there watching, someone's going to come up and be like, hey, what's he at? Like, he flashed a 9 in the first inning. Haven't seen anything close since. And to your point, you're right. Like, we've coached this game for a very long time. That dude's 84 to 86. He's not 89. Like, it's in there. And we know that and we value that. Like, you'll hear guys say that all the time. Like, it's in there. It's just figuring out how we can get that out at a more consistent basis. And I think the other thing, I was a catcher. One of the most egregious stats that go on nowadays are pop times. Like, the amount of guys that I see that are like 1.7, like I get emails 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. No, you're not. Like, that number, more than anything else, needs to show up in games. If you're going to tell me you're a 1.8, like, you better be a 1.8 in game. When the pitcher throws the baseball, somebody's actually stealing, there could be a swing, and you have to deliver that baseball to second base. And it's very nuanced, in my opinion, and I can go on this for hours, but it's not. It's the only thing in a showcase setting that you can legitimately evaluate and give a number to a catcher, which is why I think it's become a rather large thing for a lot of high school kids and kids that are going through the process. But the reality is, you're going to catch 200 and around 200 balls if you're catching in college a day in a game. You're going to block 20-ish. They might steal 3, 4 balls, like try to steal 3, 4 bags on you. And at the college level, a lot of that is done off of pitchers. It's not necessarily always going to be off the catcher. You got a guy out there who's a 1.8, and I'm getting a little off track here. I digress for a second. You got a guy who's a 1.8, like, you got no shot. It is what it is. But you are 1.8 to the plate, that is, not a 1.8 pop time for those that are listening. But that's one of the most egregious numbers that I see thrown out nowadays. And when you show up to watch a kid who tells you that he's a 1.8, Siri's talking to me on my watch. When you show up to see a kid who's a 1.8 or tells you he's a 1.9, and every time you go watch him throw, he's a 2.1, 2.2, it's not necessarily putting the best foot forward on stuff. You want to be as close to what it is that you are in game as you possibly could be. But those are the two things that, those showcase I thought about.
Yeah, those showcase pop times are crazy, right? And the college coaches, we see through that, right? Nobody, if you're a 1.8 thrower, you're better than half of the major leaguers.
Well, I think
the best dudes in the whole world.
I think JT Realmuto is the only one who was like sub 1.9 last year.
And I see that get posted all the time. And coaches don't, your pop time on your name whatever organization profile, if I see a 1.85, I don't get excited. I'm wondering what's wrong. Like, all right, how bad did you cheat on your stance there, right? If I'm evaluating a catcher, like, pop time's great. I want a kid who's accurate. I want a kid who can throw from multiple sets, right? Like, you don't get that up glove side ball that you get to throw on in game very often. Like, I need a kid who's got some athleticism, who can throw from awkward positions. I want a kid who's got the ability to put the ball in the bag, because if you're a 2-0 thrower and your pitcher does his job, you're going to throw out the guys you're supposed to throw out if you're on the bag. It's really that simple.
It is.
If you had an honest poll of college coaches right now, none of them can honestly tell you in game that they have a bunch of guys who throw 1.9s. You might have some that get there every once in a while because they got freaky arm strength and the pitch is set up right, but like, most dudes just aren't going to throw at that elite number, and that's okay.
Yeah, there's
but
nothing
wrong. You're right. That's one of the numbers that
literally nothing wrong.
Crazy that they post them.
Right, and same thing to your point, that you're not throwing on high glove side fastballs, let your feet get going. The whole point, I coached third base for 13, 14 years. You pick spots to steal bases, not on fastballs. So we're getting these times on high glove side fastballs that let your feet get going. When in game, I'm trying to find sliders and breaking balls and changeups to run on that are not going to be in those spots for you to throw. so we digress a little bit, but the point is when you're in the metrics game and you're looking at a lot of those things, it is that you're obviously trying to put your best foot forward in those showcases, right? And that's great. We want to see that. And I think as coaches, I can't tell how many times I was at showcases and you'd hear people say like, the parents and people in the stands, like, that's a lot of pressure on these kids out there. Like all these coaches are watching and there's things going, there's so much going on. Like, that the thing that they need to understand, like we like that situation because you're right. It is pressure filled. And when you get to college, it's going to be even more pressure filled. Like, I don't care where you play, whether you played at RPI for me, or you're going to go play in the ACC and play at Wake Forest or Florida State, or you're going to go play at Arkansas, whatever it is. All of a sudden there's, 300, 400,000 to 3,000 people in the stands. There's a lot of pressure there. We want to know, are your numbers that you're putting up going to show up in those spots? And sometimes early on in your career, it might not, but we're recruiting you because we've seen enough of you to say, I think he's going to be able to do it. Now it's developing that kid once he gets to campus to bring those numbers out when the lights are on and when it's need be. We like those pressure things. That's why we like that. But those numbers do need to continue to show up when we get into games.
Yeah, and I think that probably segues into part 2 of the evaluation, which for most coaches, they'll tell you that the talent evaluation is generally the easier part of it, right? Like if you show up to a game and a kid's throwing nitro and he moves really well and he does some of the other stuff good, like you can see the talent. Same thing with a hitter. You see a kid who just looks confident in the box. He has good takes. He's able to get to velocity, seems to have an idea of what he's doing from a baseball perspective and what he's trying to handle from, an approach perspective. Like that's easier stuff to figure out. To your point, how do you get that to show up every day? And it usually comes down to finding the right kid. And that's where a lot of kids get, that's where the recruiting process can end for a lot of kids. And it's that program fit character evaluation that coaches are going to really bear down on, because when you get to college baseball, it is a different game. It's not the same game as high school, right? 60 feet, 6 inches, bases are 90 feet apart, 3 strikes, 4 balls, 27 outs. Like those are the commonalities, but the college game is very different. And it starts with practice. It starts with the baseline level of commitment that's required to be successful at that level. We've all seen it. Freshmen get to campus in their first year and they've never practiced like a college team has practiced. And they think it's just, well, we're just going to show up and take a bunch of bat and practice and like some pitchers are going to go throw bullpens, but they don't understand that practice time at the college level, that's team time, right? That's team time. You want to get extra swings. You want to get that stuff in. Like you need to find time before or after. And in order for guys to be successful in that environment, they got to have some of those character traits that are really valuable. And do they all come out in the recruiting process? No, because if they did, you wouldn't miss.
Right.
But most coaches will tell you, I'd rather miss on the talent side than I would the character side.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. I was thinking about this the other day when you and I were kind of going over what we were going to talk about for this. And, I think the character piece becomes, and especially over the last, probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years, has become very, very important for pretty much everyone. You're preaching what you want to do within your program, to your point, the commitment level, what goes on within your program, and how you kind of set the tone for the pillars or what the foundation of your program stands for. You're going to try to find kids to fit that. And, I can't, I had a kid who specifically came to mind that we passed on, mainly because he came on campus, and I'll be honest with you, he was unbelievably rude to his mother. And I was like, I'm no shot. Like, there's no shot this kid is going to come play for me. And it's, I think it's little things like that sometimes that, you think about it as a coach, like if he's going to be this rude to his mom, Like, what's he going to do to me when I get into him? And I'm not going to deal with that. And on the flip side, you have kids that are, super respectful and, the yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, things of that nature. Like they, all of a sudden, you get a little bit more respectful. Like, that checks a box. It doesn't check all of them, but it might check one for some people. So it's, I think a lot of it, from a character standpoint, like you start with kind of, who is this kid? Is he tough? Does he have good body language? Is he a good teammate? Is he a good person? Right? Because at the end of the day, like you want to bring in good people into your program. The more you can kind of surround yourself with good people, generally speaking, the better it's going to make you and the better it's going to make those around you. So I think, as coaches, and we would talk about this all the time when I was at RPI, when you leave, like you want to leave the jersey in a better spot than when you found it. Right? Like, and how do you don't do that by, not putting in the work, not putting in the time, not doing the right thing on and off the field. So it's creating that culture that you hear everyone talk about, within their program. How do you create that culture? And once you do create that culture, how do you get everyone to really buy into that idea and what it is that you're doing? And it starts with, the character evaluation that you talk about with the kids that you're looking to bring in to your program. And when some kids might not fit the mold for your program, but they fit the mold for someone else, and that's okay. It's not necessarily that to go on some things that you do. Just like, hey, I just don't know if it's going to fit here. And then you go and see that kid at another school, and he's really good. And it's because that culture that he's in there with that coach suits him far better than it would with you at your program.
Yeah. I mean, as a coach, you're trying to find talented kids, but you're trying to find talented kids that you want to coach. I want to be around kids that I enjoy showing up to the field because they're there. Mm-hmm. And we've all had kids that we don't. Mm-hmm. But when you have a group of kids, and it's not even about, once they're there, it's not even necessarily about how good they are, but like when you walk into the locker room as a coach, I want to feel like, good. Happy that so-and-so's here today. Like let's get out there and get after it a little bit. Like you want to have kids like that. And the character evaluation can be tricky because you don't have as many touch points with kids, right? Decisions get made super quick now. And is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. I think it's good for some kids. I think for a lot of kids, they need to wait. But from a coach's perspective, I want to try to get to know you. And one of the first ways that guys get to know a player is over the phone, right? Mm-hmm. How do you talk to a coach over the phone? Are you prepared? Do you call them on time? Do you call them, Jim, or do you call them Coach Smith? Do you talk to them like they're your friend, or you talk to them like they're an adult that you have a ton of respect for? That stuff goes a long way, right? It's not the end all be all, because at the end of the day, you are recruiting in today's day and age, you're recruiting 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. So yeah, that 14-year-old kid might not be that great on the phone, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, that is an impression that you make, and it's a compilation of these impressions, right? It's a compilation of impressions that you make on the field, and then it's a compilation of impressions that you make with your interaction with coaches. The other stuff that I think it's important for players and parents to recognize in the evaluation process is they pay close attention to what you do when they don't think you're looking, right? How do you react when you strike out, right? How do you react when a kid hits a double off you to lead off an inning, right? How do you fail? That's a huge piece of the baseball puzzle, because there's too much talent. There's too many really good players out there for me to walk away with character concerns because you can't handle when things don't go your way. Because I can promise you, when you get to college, you're going to have stretches where you fail. You're going to strike out a bunch, or you're going to make errors, or you're going to be on the mound and you're going to get smashed one game. And what are you going to do to bounce back? The other piece of it is most kids don't get to go start every day as a freshman. And if you're a tough kid and you can handle some failure and you can handle not being at the front of the line at all times, that gives me confidence that I can bring you into my program, that we can focus on development and you can get ready to contribute when it's your time to contribute, right? That's a huge piece of it. How do you talk to your coaches? How do you interact with your coaches? How do you interact with your teammates? That's a huge giveaway, right? We all love to see the guy that the teammates clearly gravitate to, because there's something to be said about that. How do you run down the first baseline? Do you play hard? That's all a piece of the character puzzle. The other thing, and I'm going to put the parents on notice here real quick, is it's not hard to find out if I'm at a game whose parents are who. All you got to do is watch a little bit of body language, see how people react. And mom and dad, if you're listening, be cognizant of the fact that coaches pay attention to how you react, how you treat your kid, how you talk to umpires, how you interact with other parents. We don't deal with parents at the college level nearly as much, but nobody wants a pain in the ass parent, because it's a waste of my time. It's a waste of other players' times. And is it going to get you crossed off a list? I don't know. Maybe if you're good enough, it won't. But don't let it be the reason you get crossed off the list. And I've definitely walked away from games and gone back to my boss and said, I think mom and dad are going to be an issue. And we just move on to the next guy, because there's too many good players for us to have to deal. If you raise such a red flag that's my reaction, we don't have time for it. We can go find another good player.
No, there's plenty of them out there that I learned very early in my career. But I think one of the things, and it's super cliche, you heard it when you played, I heard it when I played, not that we're far apart, and people still say, like, you don't know who's watching it. And there's a lot of truth in it. Nowadays, I was at RPI for 10 years. I don't think I wore an RPI baseball shirt, hoodie, jacket, hat, anything to games ever in the 10 years I was there. Like at a camp, yeah, I had to, but physically going and watching games, I never wore anything RPI because I didn't want you to know that I was there. I wanted to see what you were going to do if you didn't think I was there. And I think that's, you can kind of start to figure out what kind of, like, who, if someone is a college coach, just kind of by the way they dress, but by and large, you're not really going to know who they are, and I think that's where, you have to be somebody that they're going to want to be recruiting, whether they're there or not. And that's, that's kind of hard to do, I think, sometimes. And that's where, as coaches, that's why we go incognito to try to figure out who, what this kid is going to do. Is his body language going to be horrific? When he punches out, does he throw his helmet in his bat and act like a child? Like, I'm not dealing with that, quite frankly. Same thing, like you said, you give up a double, like, this is a hard game. If this was easy, everybody would do it. You go you go out 7 times out of 10. People are like, yo, that dude can roll the pole a little bit. And that's ridiculous. You knock down a 30 on your math test, like, no one's coming to you to tutor them in math. Like, it's not something that they're going to do. So you have to be able to understand that this is a game of failure, and how you handle that and how you react to that tells us a lot of who you are and what it is that you could be capable of doing. And if every time you fail, it's just a complete nightmare, and you're throwing your stuff and you're mad and you're yelling at people and you're not a good teammate and you're not trying to lift other people up, your teammates, and there's enough guys out there that are going to be just as talented, that are going to do that stuff, that college coaches are just going to move on. And the same thing with parents. I can't tell you everyone who sat in my office in the 10 years I was at RPI. I was like, you can call me on the health and well-being of your child and academic stuff, but anything else, do not even attempt to try to talk to me. Don't pull me aside. Don't text me. Don't email me. It's off the table. Like, I'm going to treat your son as an adult. He is going to know why he's not in the lineup. He's going to know what it is he needs to do in order to be better, to get the baseball, to do whatever. But at the end of the day, circling back to the start, like, how are you going to help me win? If every time you're in the game, you punch out, or, you're 1 for 10 and the guy you're competing with is 5 for 10, like, the guy who's 5 for 10 is going to be in the lineup more. If you're competing with a guy with innings and you get the ball and you give up 7 runs in a third of an inning, and the other dude goes scoreless and punches out the side, the guy who just punched out the side is going to get the ball again. You're going to have to wait your turn a little bit longer to get the ball back. It's not that you're not going to, but at the end of the day, it becomes when you get your opportunities, what do you do with them? And again, that goes back to the metrics. They have to show up, right? Like, you could be really good. Same thing. Like, you could have high exit velos and you could do a lot of really good stuff in practice, but there's a reason that, there's that phrase from the big leagues. Like, there's a lot of 5 o'clock hitters, right? Like, hey, he's really good in BP. 7 o'clock rolls around and dude can't hit, so it's those things that they continue to have to happen once you get to college. It's not just, and you're on the roster, it doesn't just stop once you get there. And it is a faster game. The game speeds up on guys. It took me my entire freshman year to really figure out how to slow games down for myself. You got into the game and all of a sudden it was like, this is the fastest thing I've ever seen in my life. And all of a sudden dudes are throwing, 90, 92. Guys run a lot faster. Guys throw harder. It's a far faster game. You have to learn how to slow that down for yourself. And it does take time, and that's where, being able to understand that and understand that you're going to struggle, you're going to fail. It's how you respond to those things. Do we fold like a cheap tent, or do we show up and take extra swings? Do we show up and be like, hey, I'm really struggling, going backhand on balls in the hole? Like, can we, what can we do to get better at that? I'm struggling on breaking balls away. Like, I just feel like I'm yanking off everything. Like, what can we do? Doing those things day in and day out are what is going to tell me that you are going to be a good player. It's easy to show up when, everything's going well. It's when it's not going well that when those kids start to show up, it's like, all right, like we're going to be really good. That kid's going to be good because he shows up when, at every single point in time, whether it's going good or going bad, that dude's still hitting. And those are the guys, to your point, like, those are the guys that are super fun to be around. Those are the guys you want to coach. It's like, what you are going to get every single day.
When you get the right kids, culture creates itself, right? If the culture comes from the coach, it's one thing, right? And the coaches hold the standard, right? You set the bar, you set the standard for what the expectation is. But when you have high character kids who uphold that standard, it's a totally different dynamic. And anybody who's been involved in a really good team at any level, you have kids who do that, right? And one quick side thing, and then I definitely want to touch on the academic piece because I think it's something that doesn't get talked about in the evaluation process. But when I was at William & Mary, Ryan Lindemuth was that guy. And yeah, he was a stud. Got drafted twice, ended up playing pro ball in the Yankees organization. But his biggest contribution was that he was the tone setter for the whole program. And we had some awesome personalities on that team. And we had a really talented team my first year as at William & Mary. But Ryan was the one that, as a coaching staff, we never had to worry if somebody was going to play hard, because everybody knew they had to play hard because Ryan played hard. Mm-hmm. And he was the best player who played the hardest. And it changed the whole dynamic of that team, was having a leader like that. And as a coach, if you can get a couple of those, it's a game changer. So that's why the character piece is really valuable. But academics, now this is near and dear to both our hearts. We both coached at high academic institutions. But I think that there's a couple things that are important about the academic side. One, the better student you are, right? So if you're a young high school player right now, if you're a freshman, if you're a sophomore, understand that it's cool to be smart. right? There's nothing wrong with doing well in school. You're not a geek. You're not a nerd. Do as well as you're supposed to do, right? If you're an A student, be an A student. The better student you are, the more doors remain open to you, right? It doesn't mean you have to go and play in the Ivy League. But if you're a better student, more schools are attainable for you because you can actually get in, right? Mm-hmm. The second piece of it is your academic achievement can impact the financial picture when it comes to scholarships or merit money, because the way schools operate, for all of you listening that don't know, 11.7 scholarships at the Division I level recently is being spread out across 32 guys. Do the math. There aren't any full scholarships getting thrown out. And if they are, they're incredibly rare. One of the ways you can help yourself is if you're a really good student, you can get merit money at a lot of these schools, right? Not everybody can stack. A lot of them can. And you might be a more attractive athlete to a program because you're academic. They might be able to give you slightly less baseball money because you're a really good student, and that might open the door for them to be able to add another guy to the class. That's just a blanket statement around it, but there's financial consequences to it, and you also want to have as many doors open as possible. It's competitive enough to go into it and have 50% of the schools not attainable from an academic perspective because you didn't want to work hard your freshman and sophomore year.
To that point, I can't tell you how many times in 10 years at RPI, I would just, look at get a list of the kids that are at said event, go through all the GPAs, and I can legitimately cross off, 20 kids to start. That doesn't mean that they can't go to, really good schools. It just means that, I can see that they're a 3.0 student and you got a 550 on the math portion. I'm at a STEM school. You need to be pretty good at math. So, by and large, you're probably not a STEM kid anyways, but I can't really do anything with you academically to get you in the door. And I think, some of the things academics are so important. Your parents are going to harp on them. My parents harped on them. I was an average student at best. But it not only does it keep more doors open for you, it does allow for you to get more money. It also tells coaches, this is not a kid that I'm going to have to worry about on campus off the baseball field, because I know he's squared away from a school and academic standpoint. That's one less kid that I have to worry about. That's, study hall, it's midterms, it's grades, it's homework, it's all of that stuff where it's okay, I have 32 dudes on this team. I do not need to worry about 32 dudes from an academic standpoint. So if I see that you're squared away, it's okay, don't have to worry about it. That kid's going to do really, really well in the classroom. Now all I have to do is really develop this kid from a baseball standpoint. So there's a little bit more that goes into it there that is amazing. It just ends up becoming, you do get the more money, and that's great. And you do get more doors open, and you don't have to go to, a top end academic school. You go where you're going to fit in the best, but it's going to tell the coaches, to your point, hey, didn't really care the first couple of years. If you care and you do well, or you care and you don't do well, that's one thing. You care, you don't care, you don't do well. Then it's all right. When things get tough, is this kid going to show up for me? It's showing me he doesn't necessarily care about the things that, you start talking about what separates guys at the college level, and I'll digress for a second, but what separates them is being able to pay attention to detail, being able to do the little things right. And that ends up, that comes out a lot more from the academic side, I think, for people that, I learned over the 10 years I was at RPI. That stuff shows up there, and it's a direct correlation to the guys that, can generally be able to do things a little bit earlier in their careers than some other guys because they are squared away off the field. Then it translates on, so that stuff plays into it as well. And from an academic standpoint, you can kind of tell that stuff based off of what what their grades are and what they do outside off the field in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an extension of the character evaluation, at least a piece of it. And guys who typically do well in the classroom, they generally bring that onto the field. It's not always. I mean, we all played with guys who weren't all that studious and were fantastic players, but I do think that they're a little bit of an outlier. Like most guys who are super competitive and show up every day and they do the things that they're supposed to be doing. They're on time. They're putting in extra work. They're a good teammate. Like most of those guys take care of their business off the field, and that starts with the classroom, because those first 6 months for a kid when they get to a college campus, and it's why a lot of coaches and why a lot of programs are bringing kids onto campus early. They're bringing them in for a 3-week session in the summer, is because those first 6 months can be a real kick in the gut for kids. In those 6 months, if you can't handle yourself academically, if you can't figure out how to manage your time, because you get freedom, the coaches aren't going to hold your hand. If you can handle that, you're more likely going to figure out how good you can be quicker than a guy who struggles for the first 6 months. And you may fall behind the curve. And if you fall behind the curve, every year there's new guys coming in, and if you have trouble getting on the field before the end of your sophomore year, you're probably not getting on it. So yeah, the academic piece matters for the 3 reasons that we outlined, and it shouldn't be overlooked. And if you're a player listening to this, you're a parent listening to this, it's not about being a 4.0 student and taking all APs, right? It's about, if you're an A student, be an A student. If you're a B student, be a B student. It's about being the best student you could be, because it is a reflection of how much you care about other stuff.
Right. And we would talk all the time. I had a stint in admissions at RPI when I started there too. Even just for not even baseball players, for just general students, they're not always looking for that kid who just takes all APs and all honors classes. Like, they want you to challenge yourself academically, but do it within the reason. Don't take 15 APs because you think that's what everyone wants to see and knock down a bunch of C's. Take 1 or 2 and get A's and B's. Take an honors class, get an A or B, and then take regular classes. There's a not necessarily a strategy, but you don't want to bury yourself in the classroom just to try to show that you can handle some stuff, because if you can't, it's going to be it's not going to end well for you. So it's I think that it's a very important piece of the puzzle, and it's not necessarily something that college coaches don't take into account or really look at. And it's not necessarily we're not talking about this kind of last because it's the least important thing. I think it's very obvious that academics matter. I don't necessarily think that it really has to be said, but I do think that, for the couple of things that the points that we make, that's why they are important. It might not just be because if I get good grades, I can go to good school. Yeah, but you also can get more money. You can go, it keeps more doors open. It tells people that you actually care and you're going to be squared away. There's a lot more, I think, that goes into it than just I got really good grades. That's the obvious answer and the, right in your face, so there's more that goes into it, obviously. But that's why.
Well, I think we just about covered it for today. So, quick summary here. Talent evaluation is way more nuanced than your baseline numbers, right? What you do needs to show up in a game, right? If you throw 90, I need to see it on game day. If you throw 90, I need to be able to pitch. Right, those metrics matter, but understanding that they're just the beginning piece of the puzzle for a lot of coaches, and they're going to be more concerned with what do you do when it's time to go compete, right? And understanding that every program that looks at different stuff. So, kids who are listening to this, you're going to get told no, and that's okay. Everybody values different things, but understanding that there's more nuance there is really probably the first step to better understanding what coaches are looking for in the recruiting process from a talent perspective. And I don't think we can harp on it enough. The character piece is a lot of times is what separates people in the recruiting process. So if you're a player listening to this, don't get crossed off a list for something you have control of, which is how hard you play, what kind of teammate you are, how do you talk to your coaches, how do you talk to your parents, how do you handle yourself when something doesn't go your way. Those are things that coaches are going to pay attention to. Because if I show up to watch you play, I'm there because I think you're good. I'm there to try to confirm it, and I'm there to also get a feel for what kind of player you are from a character perspective. So, well, with that being said, Coach Glasser, thanks for joining today. Look forward to doing it again next week.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to having this roll out for every week for a while.
Sounds good to me.